Welcome back to the Afternoon Constitutional, and the only one of these web programs that'll take your calls if you want to make them at 434-964-1075. A lot of ground to cover. We're going to talk about the extinction of perhaps an entire species of whales. I know it sounds like a plot from a Star Trek movie, but that's what's happening at the hand of the green cult. The green cult is come after the right whale. Maybe it's because they're called the right whale. We're going to talk about that with Steve Milloy from junkscience.com coming up in a little bit. We're also going to visit with best-selling author and humorist Dave Barry, who's one of my favorites. And he's got a brand new book, first one in 10 years. I guess he's been busy playing in his little band with Stephen King and Amy Tan. But all that on the lineup, but everyone's attention has been gripped by the collapsing banks. There was a theory back when I was a kid. It was called the domino theory. I guess that also applies to banking. And joining us from the Heritage Foundation to help make sense of the, now it's the New Republic Bank. And again, maybe it's the Republican Bank. That's why it was going under. But joining us from heritage.org and the Heritage Foundation, EJ Antoni. EJ, thank you so much for taking some time out with us. How are you doing today?
Joe, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
So there has been several columns written about this bank collapse because they were teetering on, as I understand it, on collapse months ago and got some help and still wound up caving in, and JP Morgan Chase had to come and buy them up, correct?
Correct. And it really speaks to just what terrible shape they and many other banks are in. The fact that the FDIC tried so hard all weekend long to find a buyer, and yet no one even wanted to bid at auction for this thing. And so JP Morgan had to come in at the 11th hour, really just before the stock market opened on Monday, in order to try to calm fears and quell further panic.
So what is driving all of these? I mean, it seems like there are several commonalities. Is it the woke investing that we saw at Silicon Valley Bank? Is it cryptocurrency that seemed to be teetering? Or is there something deeper going on in here, something more substantial, EJ?
No, it really is much more substantial, and it's this. There is systemic interest rate risk, and it's across the entire banking system. It has even affected the Fed itself. In fact, the Fed's balance sheet has lost about $1 trillion of value.
Oh my
So,
God.
oh yes, far from isolated instances. This is a truly systemic problem, and it all came about because the Federal Reserve stepped in to create literally trillions upon trillions of dollars for the government to spend. And to do that, it drove interest rates down to zero and kept them there for far too
Yeah.
long.
So somebody used the expression we were paying. Banks were paying people to take money from them. That's how low the interest rates had gotten. And now they're trying to bring that back. Is it too little, too late? What they've been doing with the Fed and the interest rates?
Oh, very, very much so. And it's really amazing that too little, too late was still the fastest interest rate hikes in several decades.
Yeah.
So that just shows you, number one, how woefully behind the curve the Fed was in beginning to raise rates. But it also speaks to the fact that the Fed has painted itself, and therefore the nation, into a corner here. And the only way out is going to be pain.
So EJ Antoni is on with us from the Heritage Foundation. EJ, what about the sovereign debt part of this? Because people have told me that this was really, if there's a string that goes in between a lot of these banks, it's how much they've invested in our government, basically. And my concern is not just for that, but while I listen to members of the Senate demagogue, full faith and credit, and playing games with the Social Security Trust Fund, if I'm not mistaken, the Social Security Fund also has an awful lot of that sovereign debt in it, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. And so does the DIF, which is the fund that the FDIC has, which it uses to pay these claims on these failed banks. And so one of the great ironies here is that these banks are going under because they're having to sell assets which have gone down in value in order to pay depositors. So now the FDIC is going to have to sell precisely those same kinds of assets in order to pay those same depositors that the banks couldn't pay because they went bankrupt. But going back to the broader question here of sovereign debt and the apparently impending defaults, Biden and Yellen keep talking about default. They keep
Hmm.
throwing the word around. It frankly is a scare tactic. The Treasury takes in more than enough revenue to pay all of the Treasury bills, bonds, and notes, all of those debt instruments that are outstanding. That's not a problem. There's also plenty of tax revenue coming in to pay for things like Social Security,
Hmm.
Medicare, all of our veterans benefits, for example. All that's going to happen if we don't raise the debt ceiling is we just have another government shutdown.
Well, and speak to that because a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, actually somebody who worked in the banking industry before going to Congress. Go figure. We have a banker in Congress finally. Told us that very thing that we're looking at a government that's going to take in $5 trillion in revenue. It shouldn't be having a problem paying its bills if that's all it needs to do, right?
Right. The government actually, in terms of revenue right now, the government has never taken in more money. Tax revenue has never been higher. And I don't care if you want to measure it in terms of a percent of GDP or a percentage of income. You can measure it in nominal terms, in real terms, meaning adjusted for inflation. Tax revenue has never been higher than it is today. And yet somehow Congress and the White House have managed to spend the money even faster than it's coming in.
So, what is the fix for the issues both in the House? We're looking at this debt ceiling debate. I guess next week they'll sit down with this. Janet Yellen sent a sternly worded letter to Kevin McCarthy saying, "Don't make me turn this Federal Reserve around." What is the fix to this? We go for a $1.5 trillion debt ceiling increase. What does that get us? Does it get us through to a place where we can start, putting more money into our coffers than we're putting out?
Hopefully, and this debt ceiling increase from the House of Representatives is not the final answer here. It's not the
Hmm.
ultimate fix, but it is a step in the right direction. We need to start cutting back the spending. That is what got us into this mess, and cutting the spending is the only thing that will get us out of the mess. And in terms of Janet Yellen or any of the other officials, frankly, running their mouth on the debt ceiling, can we please all stop listening to the same people who told us inflation was transitory? I mean, these people are perpetually wrong and never in doubt.
I'm waiting for them to use the phrase "the interest rate hikes are safe and effective." EJ, that's about and I'm not. Sometimes I feel like I have to satirize this simply because it's going to keep me from climbing a clock tower somewhere with a rifle because it's so infuriating. Because people like you and this program, not for any other great reason than we know people like you, have been talking about this for 2 years now. And it's just been whistling past the graveyard as people's inflation 8, 7, 6. Oh, now it's only 6% inflation. Grocery prices, gas prices. So that was the personal level. Now we're watching it at a bigger level. How much further do you think this? Not just the banking defaults. Maybe we'll start with the banking defaults, but what more could be brought down as some of these quote regional banks start to struggle?
Well, in terms of what could be brought down here, literally everything. And the reason I say that is because the problems go much deeper than just regional banks. We have been absolutely abusing the rest of the world financially for 7 decades by trying to inflict upon the rest of the world, or in other words, export to the rest of the world, inflation created by the Federal Reserve. And we've done that by virtue of being the world's reserve currency.
Mhm.
All of that is coming to an end, right? It's not happening overnight, but it's happening slowly and then suddenly, as the saying goes. And so once the dollar loses that reserve currency status, you're going to see 70 years of trade deficits all come home to
Wow.
roost.
Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
think of the trillions of dollars that would flood into this country. And just having more money is not a good thing. It's only a good thing if the output of your economy increases at the same time. Otherwise, it's what we've seen over the last 2 years. It's just inflation.
Well, how we've seen the stories. I think it's the United Arab Emirates, Egypt have all said, "Oh, sure, we'll sell oil for yuans. We'll sell oil for rubles. We don't have to use for gold." How perilous is the U.S. position that I guess it's held since Bretton Woods at the end of World War II as the reserve currency of the world?
It's incredibly perilous. It's difficult to overstate how much risk there is to the dollar right now, and the absolute cataclysmic fallout that would come from the dollar being dethroned around the world. And again, one of the very difficult things to tell here is, where is the point of no return? Because
Yeah.
at some point, the momentum of the movement of de-dollarization is just enough that it's going to take you over the falls, and that there's nothing that you can do to prevent it. The problem is knowing exactly where that point is. We may have crossed it already. Hopefully, we haven't.
But when you hear the rhetoric coming out of Washington, D.C., EJ, it doesn't sound like there's one political party that is concerned about it at all. They all pick the same talking points. This is about money spent already. This isn't about debt. This is all the same talking points from the group I call the Tenacious D's. They won't let go of it, and debt on arrival is what they call the spending plan. And yet, the conservatives are the ones that are closed-minded in this. Are there any members of the other party, aside from the Republicans, that are even teetering on breaking ranks and saying, "Yeah, we've got to get this debt deal done"?
Even a lot of the Republicans, quite frankly, have not shown the spine to be willing to do what needs to be done to cut spending, to get some kind of deal done on the debt ceiling. And so I don't want to paint with too narrow of a brush in this instance and say that the problem is exclusively on the Democrat side. I think it's on both sides of the aisle. Fortunately, a small handful of conservatives, true conservatives in the House, are really holding everyone else's feet to the fire. And they are, in some ways, the country's only hope of actually, again, getting done what needs to be done.
And meanwhile, they get called all sorts of names in the press, and they're the ones who are being castigated for putting the full faith and credit of the U.S. Economy in this kind of peril. What is the nightmare scenario if we lose this reserve currency? Do we go full Grecian formula? Are we talking about an economic collapse where people are buying and looking for pesos rather than dollars to walk across the U.S. border, EJ?
Oh, in terms of de-dollarization, if that actually happens, if we see that to completion, it's not going to be Greece where you have 100% inflation. It's going to be Weimar Republic where inflation is measured in the thousands of percent. I mean, it gets to the point where workers, for example, are paid 3 times a day so that they can go out and spend their wages before they lose all their purchasing power.
Oh
That's
my
not an
gosh.
exaggeration. It has happened before. It can happen again. And it will happen if, again, those trillions upon trillions of dollars all come home at once.
How dangerous is the fact that China is a large overseas holder of our debt? There are different levels of rhetoric on it, but China does seem to hold an awful lot of our debt. Are they holding it for a reason? Is there a danger? Should we be trying to get that back from them?
Well, in a lot of ways, they were holding it because the dollar was a much more sound reserve currency years ago. But just under Joe Biden, it's lost 15% of its value. I mean, that's not a good store of wealth by any means. And so, what China has been doing the last several years is they have slowly been getting rid of their US Treasury holdings. Now, they still own a substantial amount, don't get me wrong, but it has decreased significantly in just a few years. And that trend looks to be continuing. They're not purchasing debt anymore, they're selling it, in
Hmm.
terms of our debt at least.
So do you see any fixes? I know they've talked about test running this cryptocurrency, this digital currency by the Fed. I know that stories out of Beijing that their digital currency actually expires. I mean, it's even beyond some of the stories of, oh, they won't let you purchase certain things with it. I mean, this thing straight up expires after 6 months. You talk about workers having to go out and spend their earnings before lunchtime. What are some of the things that they're talking about aside from just saying, "Hey, everyone, send us your dollars back"?
Cryptocurrencies, in terms of when they're centralized, in other words, what we call a central bank digital currency or CBDC,
Mm.
are incredibly dangerous because they represent an unprecedented level of, frankly, beyond Orwellian control, where the government can do things exactly like what you're talking about in China, where they can dictate how you spend your money and when you spend it.
Mm.
And these are things that some central bankers in other parts of the world from so-called democracies are actually applauding and saying that they want to be able to implement
Gosh.
in their own country. And when you think about it, there are plenty of economists who will tell you that the problem in recessions is that people aren't spending enough money. And so those same economists will turn around and say an advantage to a CBDC is that if your dollars expire, it forces you to spend them. You can't save them. And
Oh.
then that will somehow magically help the economy by everyone depleting their savings and not having any money for investment, which is how we get capital, which is how we increase wages in the long run, which is how we get economic growth. The entire system is so incredibly backwards. But again, it's being driven by this just insatiable desire from the politicians, the bureaucrats, the
Mm.
monetary scientists who want levels of control that, frankly, we have only read about in fiction up until this point.
Yeah, that's the what's the ball cap say? Make 1984 fiction again. EJ Antoni is on with us from the Heritage Foundation. So we're watching the regional banks, and I find it interesting. We don't even talk about local banks anymore. These are the regional banks now are starting to crumble under this weight of their currencies, their treasuries that they own. Is there a chance that we break down the system so badly that the U.S. dollar remains, but the central banking system goes back to a localized banking system akin to what we saw when many of us were growing up? And a lot of these banks can't afford to stay too big to fail, and they wind up becoming local banks again. Do you think any of that has any possibility of happening?
Very unlikely, only if the American people, frankly, wake up to the situation and exert enough political pressure to dissolve the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is essentially a cartel agreement. I don't use that disparagingly. I mean,
Mhm.
academically, that's what it is. It is a cartel agreement of banks. It is sanctioned by the federal government, which is why it's allowed to exist. And what it does is it seeks to preserve the situation, the status, if you will, of its own members. And when you're dealing with an institution that, again, can lose over $1 trillion and still be in business, that's not something that normal market forces are going to be able to take down or going to be able to wipe away. The only way you get rid of an institution like a Fed and return the banking system to its pre-1913 conditions is if it's done by Congress.
Regular listeners to my radio show and the viewers since we've rebooted this show, EJ, will note that time frame of 1910, 1913, 1916 as the boom of the Wilsonian technocrats, where the Mark Zuckerberg of the 20th century, William Randolph Hearst, helped convince the Senate to vote away its own sovereignty and completely rearrange how the country is operated. And my friend Chris Schoenwald calls it America Mark II, and it really does seem like we've just passed the 100th anniversary of that. But that being said, when you see the demagoguery of the Social Security Trust Fund and Medicaid is going away, and so many things that they've managed to convince since the Great Society's days the poor community needs, aren't these really politically the decisions that are going to make it exponentially worse for the poorest among us in the United States, EJ?
Oh, sure. I mean, the sins of the past always catch up with you, whether they're moral or monetary. And the longer we kick the can down the road in dealing with so many of these problems, the worse we make the ultimate confrontation with the truth, which is this: you cannot spend, borrow, and print trillions upon trillions of dollars and not expect negative consequences. And I just don't know when we forgot that.
It seems like when people realized that just bags of money were a great campaign, a piece of campaign literature, are the American people getting it? And I mean at enough level where there can be some electoral consequences. Not that I'm campaigning for anybody, but I don't think members of the Democratic or Republican Party change unless there's really peril that they leave, as Mel Brooks called them, their phony baloney jobs.
No, it's amazing if you look at the American public and their understanding of monetary policy. I mean, frankly, the American people were the most monetarily literate citizenry in
Hmm.
the entire world, and that existed for well over a century. Entire presidential campaigns were waged on whether or not we should have a central bank, for instance, or whether or not the currency should be backed by gold. And today we have to put warning labels on containers of Tide Pods telling our voters not to eat them. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it is really a shame how far the American people have fallen, again, in terms of their literacy about monetary policy. And until that changes, I'm not sure the nation is ever going to get its financial house back in order.
Yeah, there's I think it's a film called Idiocracy that I feel like we're whistling past the beginnings of if we're not careful. And when you look at our educational system and we're told that math is racist and things like that, EJ, I don't think it's going to get better in the next generation.
I mean, we really honestly just have to fight like hell to take this country back. And I'm so glad you brought up education because it really does begin with reforming, if not just completely bulldozing and reestablishing the educational system in this country, which has just become so incredibly corrupt and ineffective in
Hmm.
educating our youth.
Well, is the school choice, and I know that I work with the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, and we actually partner with Heritage Foundation on the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance, and there just seems to be so many parents. Some of the percentages of parents are up in the 30 percentile in some places where they're involved in either cooperative homeschooling or homeschooling in general, alternative schooling. That could be a big step towards getting that literacy back, wouldn't it, EJ?
Oh, absolutely. When you look at so many of the failing public schools in this nation, and then you compare the students who attend those schools with students from the same neighborhoods, let's say,
Hmm.
who go to things like charter schools or who are homeschooled, the educational outcomes, I mean, they are night and day. You look at people from traditional public schools in these failing inner city districts where no one can read or write on grade level. No
Hmm.
one can read or write several grades behind very frequently. And again, the students from the exact same neighborhoods who are just educated differently, whether it's by their own parents or by non-unionized teachers, have significantly better outcomes. And not just immediately in terms of their education, but throughout the rest of their lives, they have better outcomes as well.
So we are also members of a coalition trying to bring about a convention of states, and the particular one that's going through many of the state legislatures is a call to restrict the bureaucracies, to get a balanced budget amendment based on GDP growth or shrinkage, depending on, and several of these fiscal ideas that would bring the authority at least back to the states. Can there be something like that that could address the banking issues and at least get them back to a state level rather than a federal level, EJ, in your mind?
I mean, it's certainly possible. At the end of the day, there still need to be substantial reforms to the Federal Reserve System.
Hmm.
And absent that, we're just going to be right back on the monetary roller coaster as soon as this latest crisis is over. Just like what happened at the end of the dot-com bubble, just like what happened at the end of the housing bubble. When this bubble is done, if the Federal Reserve is allowed to conduct business as usual, then another bubble will begin.
Well, and I know you're not a political science guy, but you're at the Heritage Foundation, which means you have gravitas beyond so many people when it comes to a lot of different levels. When these kind of economic collapses take place through the history, and I know in Britain, when they lost their reserve currency and their economy was in crumbles, it was because their country was in crumbles and it was the end of World War II. But when you see these economic collapses, they're generally followed by tyrannical despotism, which is the quote only way to restore a civil society is usually how they pitch it. That's to me that's the worst peril in all of this.
It's certainly a concern. I think what distinguishes America from the rest of the world in that regard is the Second Amendment, which has proven to be a significant backstop against tyranny. And we would only hope that it holds yet again.
Yeah, keep your fingers crossed on that. EJ Antoni, find out more at heritage.org. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us on this issue. What do you, just last prognostication? What are there more banks to come, or is this pretty much it now?
Oh no, there is certainly a lot more to come. We are by no means through this financial crisis. Again, we're talking about systemic problems here that reach far beyond just a few regional banks. Again, the same people who tried to tell us we're not in a recession, inflation is transitory, are now telling us these are all isolated incidences. But if everything is an isolated instance, nothing is an isolated instance.
Exactly. Thank you so much, sir, and you have a wonderful remainder of the afternoon.
You too. Thank you.
Coming up in just a moment or two, we're going to visit with Steve Milloy, because there is an entire species of whales that are very close to extinction. So we're going to visit with him in just a little bit. But joining us now is the best-selling author of many, many books and humor columns as well. And he is the great Dave Barry. And joining us now is one of the true legends of all time. I've had a chance to talk with all the iterations of Dave Barry, including the actor who portrayed him on television for a while. But this is the second time we've got to have the actual article, Dave Barry, on the program with us. Dave, it is so great to catch up with you again. How have you been?
I'm good, thank you. And so you interviewed Harry Anderson.
Oh, yes, several times. I actually got in trouble with a dice manufacturer in Buffalo once because of Harry. We were talking magic at the time. But let's talk about where you've been for 10 years, away from the bookshelves, and you're back with Swamp Story. It's a novel, and you have done this on. Is this just because Stephen King got tired of playing in the band with you and Amy Tan?
Well, no, I mean, I was going to write a novel anyway, but yeah, you're right. Stephen probably hasn't played with us in quite a while, I think.
Oh, dear.
He's found another career. I think he found that something he did even better than music. He's doing some writing.
Oh, King. Okay. Well, good for him.
He seems to be pretty good at it, and we all encourage him to.
Yeah, that's it. And so tell us a little bit about, was this sort of how you dealt with lockdowns, or?
No, it was really, I just sort of had this idea. It's been kicking around in my brain for a while to do something about the Everglades, which is the swamp in Swamp Story. And the Everglades right next to Miami, where I live. It's a strange place out there. It's right next to this major urban area, but it just suddenly turns into swamp. And people tend to think of it as just like undifferentiated swamp, but it's not. There are people out there, communities out there. There are people hiding out there. There's all kinds of legends about other things that are out there. There's legends about treasure, stuff like that. So I came up with an idea for a funny book that would be built around a couple of things. One is the treasure. And one is the thing we call the Python Challenge, which is, people don't believe it's real, but it is. We have a python problem in Miami. These Burmese pythons, which aren't supposed to be there. They're an invasive species. And what happened was years ago, people had them as pets, and then these people ran out of crack and realized they were living with pythons. So they let them go, which is not
this
a great
can't
idea.
be good.
Yeah, right. Let them go, and they thrive. They're like New Yorkers. They love, Miami area. And there's millions of, no, not millions, but hundreds of thousands of them. So the state of Florida, in its wisdom, decided that the way you deal with that is to invite amateurs to come and try to kill the pythons. And so every year they have this big contest called the Python Challenge, and whoever gets the most pythons and the longest python or whatever, they win cash prizes. So we have all these people who really don't know what they're doing, running around out there trying to kill pythons. And so I incorporate that in the book, and some guys trying to make a reality TV show are out there. in my
Because
book.
that would never happen. That would
Never happen.
It sounds like the if you get to Floribama and you get the mullet toss, which I'm not sure is about the people doing the toss or about the fish they're throwing. So
I think it's about the drinking is the mullet toss. But yeah, I've never seen the mullet toss live, but I have heard about it, and it sounds like it must smell really bad.
it must at some point either the fish or something there. So, so we're on with Dave Barry. If you don't recognize him, you should. His new book is called Swamp Story, Dave, and I'm sure it's in all the usual suspects: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and places like that. Are you excited to get out on book tours and do those things again that we were told for a couple of years might have been impolite?
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, every author likes to complain about book tours, but you really, in the end, you kind of want to go because you get to see your chance to meet the people who are reading your books. So I like them. I like them. It's just that at the end of it, I'll be dead. But then my book will be worth more. It's like painting.
That's right, unless it's Hunter Biden's paintings. So Dave, it's always good when you can make one of the funniest people you know laugh. You always feel like that's a great moment in time. Dave, why not at some point? And in the Everglades. So this is a mystery, if I'm not mistaken, but it's funnier as well, right?
Well, it's more of a caper than a mystery. I mean, you always know what's going on. There's no surprise who done. You don't know how it's going to end up.
Oh, okay.
I hope you don't. But there's lots of what we call hijinks going on, and a sort of a massive, finale where all these weird elements come together at once, and more so than like you're not like wondering what's going on. You know what's going on. These people are idiots,
and you're hoping they get caught for their own safety.
Some of them you really don't want them to have anything good happen to them.
Especially as they're out there, the amateur python hunters, I'm sure, are probably a chapter or three. Age appropriate for everyone. I mean, I've read a lot of your books to my kids when they were growing up, which probably results in how they turned out as adults. But age appropriateness.
Well, you are clearly a terrible parent. I just want to say that.
Yes, absolutely.
But I would say not. I mean, it's a book for adults. I mean, there are bad people in the book, and they talk the way bad people talk.
Okay. Right.
So I know when I first my first novel I wrote was called Big Trouble back in the 90s.
Oh yeah.
And at the time I was known as a newspaper columnist, but this was not a newspaper column. This was a book, and same thing. It had bad people in it, and they talk the way bad people do. And I got some of these. How could you use this language? And I was thinking, well, it's a book, and that's the way people talk. So the next book I wrote, like, if you don't like to see bad words, please do not read this book.
That's right.
But I still get less of those complaints these days. I think people have lowered their standards. Thank goodness.
This is why I apologize to anyone who dates or employs my kids. I read them steady streams of Dave Barry and Douglas Adams growing up. Dave, it is a joy to catch up with you. And Swamp Story, it's in the bookstores. Can people download it for e-reader as well?
Yeah, it's on Kindle and all those e-reader things. I'm the reader, in fact.
No, that's even better. Thank you, Dave, so much, and we really appreciate it, and we'll hopefully talk to you again not 10 years from now.
And well, thank you. Appreciate it, and watch out for those Buffalo dice manufacturers. They're after you.
You may have heard the story, and I was just recanting the story of our moments with the dice manufacturer. Dice made to order was what Harry Anderson had called it, and they called the radio station pretty quickly after that all went down. We're going to segue back from that, and not necessarily in the swamp, but swamp-ish. as the green people have come along and now are going to very possibly kill off an entire species of whale. And the folks who are trying to stop that are our friends at EE Legal and CFACT and Junk Science, and we here at the Government Accountability and Oversight are all for it. This is a photo taken by I think it was the New York Post, of a plane that was flying up and down the Jersey Shore this past weekend. Save the whales, stop wind turbines, stopturbines.org. And they paid for this plane to fly up and down the Jersey Shore while folks were out there looking for, I guess, whales. And that was their hope was to get the message out there even further. Now, here in Virginia, the Ralph Northam Memorial Wind Farm is also, with the couple of turbines that it has out there now, is in great peril of doing this very thing, because what we have found out from our friends at CFACT is that these are whales that use this very route where all the wind turbines are going to go conveniently out of the view of the people who pay a lot of money to live on the coastline of states like New Jersey and Virginia and Delaware. And so they put the wind turbines way out in the ocean where you can't see them per se, but they happen to be right in the migratory pattern of these whales. So the folks at Junk Science are trying to get that stopped and to stop that in its tracks. And they are definitely having some success, because the mainstream press is starting to get some traction and starting to pay attention to this very issue, and with the help of folks like Steve Milloy at Junk Science and Bonner Cohen and the folks at CFACT as well have been doing quite a bit towards getting this cleaned up. So again, the campaign goes on. You can find out more at cfact.org. And there's Steve. I know that we had said just check on him and make sure that we do have Steve coming on, because I think we had booked him for this segment here of the program. So we'll see if we can't find Steve Milloy from Junk Science and get him on, and the EE Legal folks, as well as we look around here. But we appreciate your time as well for this. And when we refer to the green movement as a cult, this is kind of what we're getting at, because they talk about protecting the environment while at the same time putting in peril an entire species of whale. And so that's the part that I'm most concerned with, is that people are not connecting the fact that the very same people that are claiming for ecology and the saving of the planet are actually driving entire species out of existence by creating these wind farms, discovering very quickly that the wind farms are very popular, especially by people's homes, especially if you've paid a lot of money to live by the seashore or up in the mountains. So they push them away there, because there's a decent amount of money at those sites. So we saw it in a place called Wintergreen in central Virginia, where there was going to be a wind turbine right on the top of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And the federal government has such a long and storied history of doing public works projects along the top of the Blue Ridge Mountains and displacing families and things like that, that we were sure that they could get her done. But the populace there was well-heeled enough and well-connected enough to stop that one in its tracks. So then we said, where should we put these wind turbines then, since nobody likes them, it seems. So they said, let's put them offshore. And then they started to put them offshore, and people, as a matter of fact, there's an entire group of people in Delaware, You know anyone from Delaware? Anyone who used to be like a U.S. senator from Delaware? Apparently, his son still lives in Delaware in their house. It's got a very, very big garage. But in any event, so Delaware pushed back against these turbines as well within a view shed. So they had to keep pushing these wind turbines further and further offshore so that they would become more and more expensive to build and then to maintain. Also putting them in great peril of failing faster. So all three, obviously the things that you would look for in a project as you develop it. And it looks like we have a crossed wire with Steve Milloy, so we will continue that subject. But again, thanks to EJ, great conversation on the banking crisis, and thanks to Dave Barry for letting me wistfully remember when the late Harry Anderson nearly got us in big trouble in Buffalo, New York. And there's some cities where the right people, you get in trouble. Okay. Hang on. We may have just. Hang on 1 second. The invitation apparently didn't get to the right people. So I'm resending it right now to Steve so we can get into the details of this and what their activities are there. So we'll do a quick reset. We're like the sports broadcaster while it's drizzling slightly at Nationals Park, and they're like, well, I don't know. They haven't called the game yet, but it is raining pretty good. So we'll see if we can't get Steve in with us here, and then go from there and finish up the broadcast with him here. Because really, Steve and junkscience.com, as well as E&E Legal, who one of our founders, Chris Horner, spent a long time with as well, have worked very hard at getting to continue to get the environment and energy laws and the regulation. And this ties in a little bit to what we talked about yesterday with the Chevron ruling, because I've already heard from people saying, Chevron, they're going to overturn Chevron. There's going to be oil in all the water. And, that's generally how these kind of things go, is when they don't have the facts on their side, they yell and scream and jump up and down and bug out their eyes and drive up everyone's blood pressure except their own, because they want people to pay attention to them, and therefore they will continue to have a fit about that. But we will continue to go from there and continue to try to get Steve in here, because it's good stuff that they're doing. And again, this photograph tells the story of what they did. And apparently a lot of people in New Jersey said, why are the wind turbines killing the whales? And that's exactly why they did it, was so that people would start asking people like the governor of New Jersey, excuse me, governor, why are these people saying that wind turbines are killing these whales? And now you put them in that corner where there really isn't a good answer for it. If you're a committed leftist and you're in the green cult, you're pretty much stuck there. I think we've reestablished Steve Milloy. The crossed wires have been fixed, and Steve Milloy is going to join us from junkscience.com and E&E Legal. And Steve, great to catch up with you. It was worth the wait. Thank you so much.
Sorry to keep you. Sorry to delay you, Joe.
Oh, it's okay. It's my executive producer right hand. It didn't tell my associate producer left hand apparently the right things. But I appreciate it, and great job with the publicity stunt, which I think, in the world of publicity stunts, if you get a bunch of people from New Jersey asking, their Congress people and their governor, hey, what do they mean that wind turbines are killing the whales? I wasn't for that. It seems like it's having a pretty good ripple effect.
Well, good. Look, environmentalism. We ran this on Earth Day. We had both a billboard. Message was "Save the whales, stop the windmills." We ran a billboard, and then we had some aerial advertising on the Jersey Shore. And the reason we did that is because environmentalism has come, 180 degrees in 50 some odd years. We've
Mm-hmm.
gone from save the whales now to kill the whales. And worse, if that's possible, than just killing the whales. We have the government lying about it, and then we have all these environmental groups covering up for the government lying about it. The government is saying, well, we don't know that the offshore wind development is killing the whales. Well, yeah, of course, there's no video.
But
And,
but it is their migratory pattern in their breeding cycle. This is exactly where they go, and that seems to be some of the biggest issue, right?
well, look, these whales weren't washing up dead, and the dolphins weren't washing up dead until all this offshore wind industry activity started. And then, amid the government denying all this, well, I, went and pulled permits, and you can see that the government is permitting these offshore wind companies to kill, dozens of endangered whales, thousands of dolphins, thousands of seals. And this is green, right?
Right.
Oh my God, this is totally Orwellian.
Well, and that's the point that I think is so wonderfully put by the banners and everything you guys are doing is none of this has ever been green, and it gets nuttier when you start talking about these wind turbines. I was just talking to the audience here. We have a little area here called the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the federal government has a long storied history of displacing residents up at the top of the Blue Ridge Mountains to put in work projects like Skyline Drive, so it certainly would have been no surprise to see them put a wind turbine farm up there, breezy up there and things like that. But the people who live there now are much more well connected than the hillbillies of 100 years ago. So that got kiboshed, and then they went offshore. And then the people who paid a lot of money to live on the seashore said, oh, no, I don't want to see them. And so they keep putting these things further and further out. We might as well just wire them up in Iceland or Greenland somewhere and just run conduit.
Well, that would be great if they could do it, but they can't. Well, actually, it wouldn't be great because it would be one thing if we were killing the whales because we had to save the planet and the windmills were going to do it. Okay, but first, we don't need to save the planet. The planet is not in danger, and even if the planet was in danger, from emissions, the windmills are just, they're not going to do it. There's just not enough of them. All they're going to do is crap up the ocean, make electricity more expensive, kill the whales, and they're going to change the environment. Which no one has even started talking about because, the cables coming off the wind turbines, they run at about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. They're very hot.
Oh, my gosh.
There's going to be nothing living.
Oh, gosh.
Anywhere close to these.
Oh, hold on. I thought we were supposed to be bringing down the temperature of the water, Steve. What the heck?
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah, the whole thing is just nuts, and you can only get away with it when you have a tyrannical, arrogant government that just doesn't care what you think. It doesn't care what logic or sanity or science or anything is.
Well, and there was logic at one point in all this, Steve. I remember when we would talk about clean coal and scrubbers on our electric power plants and natural gas alternatives, and then we found all this new sources of natural gas, and we had all these different ways to create electricity cleanly, and we led the world at it. And was that just not enough for them?
Well, that's what it was never about that.
Right.
Maybe in the 60s and 70s it was about cleaning up the many aesthetic problems we had in the environment. People seem to think that people were just dropping dead left and right from the environment. That's of course not true. So from the 70s to when I started doing this, say around 1990, we cleaned up the environment quite a bit. The rivers didn't catch on fire anymore. The air was clean. And we had cleaned up toxic waste sites, and we had done a lot of good things. But then, the Berlin Wall came down, the Soviet Union went away, and all these, anti-nuclear leftists came into the environmental movement. And ever since then, it's been, this political movement to gain control over our lives. And of course, the climate is the best way to do that because it touches the entire economy. Obamacare was leftist solution to grabbing control of 16% of the economy. Well, of course, climate is the other 84%, and that's really what this is all about.
Well, and you mentioned control, and this is one of the things that I think is so telling in the movement, Steve, is when leaders of former Iron Bloc countries, Iron Curtain countries, write books like Blue Planet and Green Shackles, and they say all the same things that you're talking about are what the Soviets did to us when they took over our countries. That's and nobody stopped and thought twice about that. And then you talk to some of these folks, and they actually seem to think that that kind of totalitarianism is a good idea. So what? It's a few 100,000 lives lost. We have too many people anyway.
Well, and so that is the ultimate game, right? They think there are too many people. As a matter of fact, they think there are about 6 billion people too many.
Hmm.
There are well, people like Paul Ehrlich, population bomb author,
Jane
uh,
Goodall.
Exalt. Yeah, they think that the carrying capacity of the Earth is less than 2 billion. Well, we have 8 billion. So they and they can't build crematoria for the 6 billion of us. So what they're doing is making it more difficult to produce energy and food, which are the two things that have gotten us to where we
Hmm.
are now, living a higher standard of living than ever before. So, I think that is their ultimate game. They want to reduce population. They've got to do it slowly. And what better way than choking off energy, choking off food? And you
So,
look at everything they're doing, that's exactly what's happening.
so what is the next step? I mean, because there's billions and billions of dollars promised to crony industries to build these wind turbine farms. We're clear cutting forests to build solar arrays. Can it be stopped?
Well, yeah, interesting you mentioned that because right now in the debt ceiling negotiations, last week the House passed a bill, yes, to raise the debt ceiling. But as part of that, the price for that is the rolling back of the $369 billion for climate junk that was included in last year's Inflation Reduction Act. So, that's a beginning. And that bill has passed the House and is, now got to be considered by the Senate and Joe Biden. So we'll see. I mean, that kind of, the Republicans say they're going to draw a line in the sand on this. I mean, so we'll see. If we could dry
Mhm.
up the funding for this green crap, maybe it'll go away. Well, we'll
Well,
go.
well, we were just talking about the banking crisis. Couldn't it be, and we see how ESG has played a role in some of this. Steve Milloy is on with us from junkscience.com. The junk economic science of what we're doing to ourselves might undo it as well, because all of a sudden you're going to need a whole lot more dollars to build those wind farms.
Yeah, Wall Street loves all this spending because all the spending is, guaranteed by the government. They can't go wrong,
Hmm.
right? That's what big business is about now. It's just about, securing, the rent seekers looking for guaranteed sources of income from the government. That's what it's all about now.
What?
Admires communist China because totalitarianism gives you certainty.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter that it's the certainty of disaster, but
Right. Well, but the few of them, few of my friends were going to be okay. What about yesterday? We did a lot of coverage on the decision by the Supreme Court to take up the case that could undo the Chevron precedent from 50 years ago that they keep hiding behind to allow these regulators like the Environmental Protection Agency to sort of just fill in the blanks on spending plans so that they can write their own laws. Is that going to help us as a toolkit to fight back on this, Steve? Do you think?
well, yeah, well, so you're talking about the Chevron versus Natural Resource Defense Council, big case from the 1980s, basically allows federal agencies to make up law when Congress has been unclear. Instead of just saying, well, Congress, you need to tell us what to do, they
Right.
just make up the law.
And
And
vote
so
for it.
now there's a case before the Supreme Court where, this Supreme Court, 6 conservative justices should flush Chevron, down the toilet entirely. Unfortunately, with conservatives, they like to make the smallest decision possible.
Hmm.
So they could just decide in this one case, or they could just flush Chevron. So I mean, they were the Supreme Court was pretty bold last year in getting rid of Roe versus Wade. So maybe they'll do the same thing with Chevron. But sometimes they do play small ball.
Steve Milloy is on with us, junkscience.com, E&E Legal. Support them, what they're doing, because this stuff doesn't happen just because somebody has a plane and says, hey, I'll take your banner up there and I'll do it for you. Talk about some of the things you have coming up.
Well, we've got a big lawsuit now in the D.C. Circuit about EPA rigging, legally mandated scientific peer review.
No, no, that would never, surely not.
Yeah, yeah, no. That's really the big thing. I work on climate all the time, and that's just a whole circus. So.
Mhm. Well, I appreciate your time for us. Sorry about the bumpy start to the interview, Steve Milloy, but help them out, junkscience.com. Keep supporting what they do, E&E Legal as well. It's good to catch up with you as well, and thanks so much for taking some time.
Thank you very much. All right, bye-bye.
And thank you for tuning in to the Narrowcast. People call these web shows narrowcasting because it's specifically there. But share it with your friends as well. And we will be back here tomorrow in this space at 3 o'clock. We got a couple of things already on the burners, which is a novelty for us. You usually try to kind of wait and see what the noontime news looks like, and then we start planning out this kind of stuff. But we'll be back here at 3 or for the radio show tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. Tune in and join us there because we've got a lot to go into there as well. So for all of us here at the Afternoon Constitutional, so long. Thanks for all the fish.